Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast, episode 55. I am your usual host, Colin McFader, along with my other unusual host.
Unusual!
Clark Coffey. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Wait a minute. Did I hear you correctly? Did you say that you're the usual host and I'm an unusual host? Or did you say we're both unusual? Wait,
no, I'm usual, you're unusual.
I gotcha. Okay, all right, fair enough. Look, it wouldn't be the first time I've been called unusual. I take it as a compliment from now on.
Right?
So you bring it. I'll take it.
So as I said, we're doing I don't think I mentioned the Deer Hunter.
You didn't.
I think
you
I just
didn't
said episode
mention
55.
Yet.
But we are doing the Deer Hunter. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
From 1978.
Yeah, if you haven't seen this film yet from 1978, then stop this podcast immediately and go watch it. Because there's going to be spoilers ahead
this
for a
40-plus-year-old movie.
40. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I feel so
years.
I feel so old, man. This film came out when I was 2. Obviously, I did not see this movie in the theater when it came out because
weren't
of
a big Cimino fan when you were 2 years old.
My aforementioned age of 2. But yeah, it makes me feel old. You're like,
have you ever gotten the chance to see it in theaters or no?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen it. It would be fun. I mean, this is a film that I might expect that somebody like Quentin might show at his New Beverly, and he may have, and I just don't know about it. But yeah, I'd love to see it, especially if it were actually projected on 35 millimeter film. Yeah. I'd love to see it. Yeah, I mean,
Zygmunt's cinematography. Yeah.
Yeah, I would take almost any excuse to see. I mean, geez, I just love seeing films in a theater. Period. So it has to be a pretty crappy film for me to not want to see it.
No, I guess I'm curious to know what prompted you to choose this. What was your choice driven by?
Yeah. So let me explain a little bit about why I chose it. But I want to hear your experience viewing this film first, though. Because I don't want to taint like what you kind of share with me, because this is the first time you've ever seen this film. So as we've kind of done in the past, I'm always curious to kind of see the film again through a younger set of eyes. A different generation is always interesting to me. But before we do that, so the reason that I picked it, when I was kind of a young, flourishing, cinephile, I was like in my teens. This was one of the films that was kind of like canon, right? It was like if you were kind of reading about films, if you were studying films, you were inevitably going to see this film mentioned. It's, and so I had watched this as kind of, I'm sure that I rented it on VHS was probably the first time that I watched it. So, here I am watching it in pan and scan on a VHS tape. So sadly, the presentation was probably not all that great and left a lot to be lacking. But the thing that really stood out to me, I can't remember a ton of that original viewing, which was probably when I was somewhere between 18 and 21 years of age. I don't remember exactly, maybe a little younger, but around there. The thing that really stuck out to me was the emotional intensity of parts of that film. And we're going to talk about those, but the Russian roulette scenes, the POW stuff. So I had this extremely strong emotional imprint that I still, if somebody were to say Deer Hunter, I'd be like, whoa, emotionally intense. I could almost like feel that from the experience that I had all those years ago when I first watched the film as a young kid. So I had this kind of emotional imprint, but I couldn't remember too much else about the film. Again, 20 plus years since I've seen it. So I just had this flash, when it was time for me to pick. I was like, I have this really strong emotional imprint still from this film, from that old viewing, but I can't really remember much about the film. I don't remember what actually happens. I only remembered like half the cast. I was like, well, I remember Walken and De Niro's in it, but I can't remember anything. Oh, Streep maybe I remembered was in it. So I thought, hey, it'll be interesting to re-experience this film all these years later, and then also get to see what your thoughts are on it. So that was kind of the overall reasoning, was like, had this strong emotional imprint, couldn't remember anything else, was curious to see how it would play today.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it was, It was interesting because, as you said,
Yeah.
this is kind of like in the canon of like movies, like American movies. It's very
It's
it's a very famous movie, and it's
Yeah.
everyone knows of the Russian roulette scene and things like that, and it's been referenced in a lot of other movies and video games, and you
it had a major impact. Yeah, so I'm super
so
curious.
it's not like I was going into this for the first time, with no idea what it was.
Right.
I knew enough about it that I kind of knew vaguely what to expect, but it did throw some curveballs. So I think one thing that really surprised me was how little of it is actually in Vietnam. I mean, I say little, it's still like a good hour of the movie, but in a 3-hour movie, you kind of expect the the center, the big kind of chunk of the majority of the movie to be in Vietnam. And
did you kind of expect it to be more traditionally a war movie, like it's going to be this?
I expected something more along the lines of a Platoon or a Full Metal Jacket or something like that, or not necessarily Apocalypse Now, because that one, of course, is, while it's a war movie, it's much more than just a war movie. But I expected something a little bit, I guess, more traditional. Whereas what I think it kind of that again just kind of threw me a curveball when I was watching it. Now it's like, and we'll get into this later when we talk about a little bit the story structure of it, but when it cuts to the Vietnam moment, I was like checking my thing to make sure I hadn't accidentally skipped ahead, because it just kind of throws you into like they've been there for months. And
now how did you watch it? Did you watch it streaming? Did you have physical media?
It was on it's on Prime Video, I think. So
okay,
I watched the Prime Video.
Okay, so you watch, and I'm assuming an HD proper aspect ratio. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had at least
I wouldn't
like
watch
a
it
decent,
cropped.
at least you had a decent viewing experience. Well, sometimes,
and it was. I mean, it was the quality was never like it was actually quite decent in terms of the scan. So
I mean, just to digress a tiny bit, I mean, you laugh about it being cropped, but I a lot of times I'll see on streaming that aspect ratios wider than 16:9 are actually still cropped into 16:9 on streaming. I know here in the States, HBO Max does that a lot. With their films, it's extremely frustrating. So I was just curious, and
a lot of Prime Video too. Oftentimes, I'll see, like I remember I was watching Poltergeist a few months ago, when
you can always tell.
The weirdest thing about it was that the credits were in the proper 235,
and then
so you have this whole, you can see, the black bars top and bottom, all that. It's in 235, and then suddenly it cuts into the first scene, and it's in. I was like, so you have the the 235 scan, but anyway. So I watched it on Prime Video, and
you're like, did it skip? What happened?
I think the other thing that's sort of strange is that, like, while the movie is about this cast of characters, these friends, you don't really get to know all that much about them. You kind of know the basics. You know that they're workers, they're Russian Orthodox, that the one guy's getting married, but you don't, like, there's not many moments of kind of like, fundamentally learning about these characters, which I thought was interesting. I thought that was very, again, different than I expected. And again, ultimately, just the fact that it was, it's not all that much of a Vietnam movie. It's like kind of like Vietnam adjacent in a way. Like, they have this experience of Vietnam, but the larger sections of the film, the 2/3 of the film are back in Pennsylvania and Appalachia. In this, like, kind of, I don't know if it's a mining town or if it's just an industry town or what it's supposed to be. But so I think that was definitely, like, the first hour of the film taking place at a wedding was definitely not something I expected. I think that it was, I definitely also, I wouldn't say that it's a movie that I was, like, hyped to see, if that makes sense. Like, it wasn't like there was a lot of, like, it's a classic movie. It's seen as a classic movie, but it's not like, it's not like going into The Godfather for the first time. And I didn't know much about it. I hadn't really spoken to a lot of people about it, so I definitely kind of went in knowing what the movie was about vaguely, but also not really. There was no preconceived opinion on it. I had no idea whether I would like it or whether I would dislike it. And I think I landed. I liked it. I think I landed somewhere, sort of like maybe 3/4 of the middle way, where it was like lots of things that I sort of questioned about it, but also, I made it through a 3-hour movie and didn't ever check my watch or my phone or whatever. So, I stuck by it, and it was good. And of course, you've got these really, really incredible performances as well.
Yeah.
John Cazale is one of my favorite actors. You've got De Niro, you've got Meryl Streep, Christopher Walken. So you have a really, really,
John Savage, who
John
did a
Savage
great,
as well. Yeah, you got this really, really incredible cast of characters and of actors that were kind of like, with exception to maybe Meryl Streep, all kind of in their like golden age, and especially with John Cazale, who passed away not long after shooting this.
Right. His last film.
Yeah, you really get this kind of incredible sense, and it's interesting seeing John Cazale in this with Robert De Niro, of course, because they were both in The Godfather, but Godfather 2, but
yes,
didn't share any screen time. Sort of like our last film, Heat, where you had Pacino and De Niro in the same movie, but they never actually shared any screen time.
That's true. Yeah, a little connection there. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that as we get into the details, I think that it will have some interesting conversations, because I definitely didn't know what to like. I subverted my expectations in a lot more ways than I expected.
Okay, that's interesting. And just in the most simplest of terms, because you've kind of shared how you were a little bit surprised at the structure. So I just to kind of, did you enjoy watching the film just from a purely audience perspective? Like, what was your experience in that sense? Just as an audience, if you're like not analyzing it, you're not looking to deconstruct it. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's Vilmos Sigmund, so it looks really good.
Mm-hmm.
The performances are great. As we've spoken about before, I'm not really one to like care about the nitty gritty plot details too often. Yeah. So I think I definitely would say that I enjoy it. Like it would be a movie that I would come out of the theater had I seen it, when it came out, and sort of say, I would give my recommendation to see it. I wouldn't give a glowing, like raving, you have to see this immediately. But I think that it was definitely a film that it's a good movie. I think that's the easiest way to put it.
Do you feel like, because it's, you say it's Vietnam adjacent, and I would agree, but it's an important part of the film. Do you feel like it being kind of U.S. centric and kind of, Vietnam centric, do you feel like that has any impact at all? Do you feel like it translates pretty directly, or do you feel like some of that might be, remove you a little bit from it? I
think the interesting thing about it is that it uses the Vietnam to analyze the impact on these people in their lives and their relationships and things like that, but it doesn't really do much to actually analyze the war itself,
so it could just be any
so
war.
Many other it could really ultimately and I also found myself watching it that as soon as it went to Vietnam, I was like, I was really interested in this kind of little mining town. Like I was like really kind of invested in that aspect, and I almost found myself like longing to go back to that. Like I weirdly enough thought that the Vietnam stuff was the stuff that I was the least interested in the whole movie. I thought that the aesthetic and the location and just the dynamic of that town was so interesting and kind of rich in detail. Like, you had all these like just funny little things like the trucks, and they're always racing. There's these kind of like faceless trucks that are flying through the town at all times. That's one of the first things you see in the movie is this truck barreling in. You almost think its brakes are broken or something because it's going through fast. And then you see that they interact with these trucks and that they all work at a steel mill and that they go out hunting into the mountains, which I don't think that's what the Appalachian Mountains look like. But I thought, and just their relationship with the mothers and the other people in the town, this bar that they're at. I almost felt like it would have been perhaps a more interesting movie to focus on that, and maybe you have. Of course, that would fundamentally alter what the movie is, but I think that was like something that I really was fascinated with, and I think that was really unique, and it almost felt sort of disjointed from the Vietnam part.
Well, there's certainly not many films, especially American Hollywood studio films, that would have ever spent an hour plus on a wedding. And you notice there are these long sections without any dialogue whatsoever, or it's kind of just, aside from maybe, some characters kind of just talking to each other very briefly, but there's not really dialogue, and there's certainly not dialogue that propels any kind of plot at all. So it's almost like it almost feels like a documentary, right? It's like you're watching these people at work and you're watching the mechanizations of the steel mill, Now you're like with them, at the bar, and you're seeing their camaraderie and how their kind of relationships are through the way that they act and speak to each other at a bar, and you kind of get a sense of the town. And then you're at the wedding and you get a sense of who these people are and what their ancestry is and their family history is, and all of these kind of things through their music, through their dance, through the way that they celebrate together. I think is very interesting. I mean, it's just rare to find a film that would take an hour to do that.
Yeah, and I, as I said, like that was kind of my favorite part about it. Like I was kind of sitting there really enjoying their dynamic when they stop the car and they're on the hunting trip and they're all having that conversation, and John Cazale starts calling Robert De Niro gay and all this, like it was like just a really, I think, fascinating relationship between these people, and also I think a really interesting kind of analysis on like class and like middle America at the time, and what these miners do, and that their lives really seem to be going nowhere, and I think I was more so surprised that it didn't really come back to that. Like it didn't really focus on that. As soon as it went to Vietnam, it kind of shifted away from that a little bit, and of course it's of course like informed by those opening moments and those well, I wouldn't say moments, those opening act really.
Yeah, it's a full act, yeah.
And it's like, and that kind of goes that carries through, but carries through to a much less extent, I think, than I expected. Even when they return back home, the relationships between these characters more or less kind of resume. Like, Robert De Niro's character in the opening is this kind of mysterious, not necessarily short-tempered, but definitely doesn't take kind of crap from anybody, kind of like tough
little
guy.
Impulsive,
And he
a
sort
little
of comes
like
back and is ultimately sort of seems very similar to that. And then the only real difference, other than like some subtleties, are the fact that he doesn't kill the deer. Of course, he lets the deer go. But like his relationship with Meryl Streep, for example, who of course is going to get married to John Savage's character when Christopher Walken's character.
Yes.
When he was supposed to return. But Streep and De Niro sort of in the opening have this kind of like flirtatious back and forth, right?
There's kind of like a little bit of a love triangle, if you will, that's set up in that first act. Of course, Walken remains in Vietnam. We can kind of get to some of that. It's, as an offshoot of his Russian roulette, but he stays in Vietnam, doesn't come back. And so then you have this kind of weird, hesitant, halfway kind of relationship with Streep's character and De Niro's character.
Yeah.
It's not ever really fulfilled, but, there's definitely I think it's used to illustrate a distance that kind of exists in De Niro's character, just emotionally, when he's emotionally distant to the entire town when he comes back, right?
Yeah, and he skips his welcome back party thing. Yeah,
serves to kind of show his alienation from this experience that he's had, that's kind of maybe pushed him even a little further away from what he used to know, and for all those people who don't have these experiences that he went to now, which of course was definitely something that was in the cultural conscience of this country at that time, very much so, was the experience that that veterans were having when they would return to the country.
Yeah, this alienation.
Alienation and even hostility they might sometimes feel from some parts of our of American culture here, but even regardless of that, just how that experience of combat and what they experienced, it just can have the potential to really isolate you or have an isolating feeling, from other people. I mean, so I have to agree with you. When I watched the film, I was surprised. I didn't remember that whole first hour, that whole first act was in effect a wedding. I mean, there's a little bit of, but I mean, it's almost, and I was really surprised by that. And it really got me thinking about, contrasting a film like this from the 70s and a film of today. And you'd also talked about, the editing, where you were like, wow, from that first act, there was just this like jump cut into, I'm in Vietnam, and I'm like, what is going on? And De Niro's character is laying on the ground, and it's hard to kind of pick up what's actually happening. You almost thought the film had kind of, you'd missed something, like maybe like it missed a section or something in the stream. Well, the film won Academy Award for Best Editing.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, and it won Best Picture, so obviously at the time, this pacing and this editing, this story technique was lauded at the time, right? It was people were obviously really spoke to that audience of that era. I'm curious, like, what do you think? I mean, it's kind of interesting to contrast this film, right? It's A, that it's a 3-hour film, B, that it takes so much time to kind of just, I want to say, almost luxuriate in these moments of character, or these moments of like showing the relationships of the town and the texture of the people in the town, and through their jobs, through the bar, through the wedding. Even when we are in Vietnam, we don't spend a lot of time in a lot of different places. Almost the entirety of that second act where you're in Vietnam, is in that little POW, that small POW camp. It's very claustrophobic. It's very small. The location's very small. We don't move much. And it's almost the entirety of that section is the Russian roulette game that's being played.
And even that, though, it's weird because it's like you're sort of sitting there. So you watch it, and you got this full hour of these guys, and the wedding is kind of doubling as a celebration for their going away to Vietnam because they volunteer.
Yep.
And then suddenly you're in this village in Vietnam. As you said, De Niro's on the ground. And then Walken lands.
Yep, and they meet up.
And it's like, okay, so clearly months have been by because they don't even really recognize each other that well, but they kind of hug and embrace.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, you're here.
Yeah.
There's this weird thing where it's like De Niro has this one-on-one with one of the
soldiers.
You
don't really know what's going on.
And then suddenly there's mortars going off, and then all of these soldiers run out of the woods, and it's like Vietnamese soldiers, Viet Cong soldiers,
which you don't even know for sure. It's like a line of soldiers.
It doesn't say
far
anything.
In the distance.
And they just kind of stand and stare at them, and then cut again, and then suddenly we're in this POW camp, this POW camp, and
they're captured.
Even that is like, I was sitting there thinking, okay, the way that I expected this film to go was that you have this opening, this send off of the characters, they go through all this stuff in Vietnam. Of course, this is a more traditional way to make a film, but that you see the send off, and then the finale of the film is this Russian roulette scene. But really, the Russian roulette scene also begins as soon as they're in the POW camp. Of course, they're watching two other people do it. But then, so then I thought, okay, so they're watching these other two people do it, and then they're not going to do it until the end, and that's going to be the big finale. But no, and then next thing you know, they're pulled up, and De Niro's like, I got to get... Like, it really, really is structured in a strange way, because it's like you're just kind of sitting there going like, well, I don't know. I was sitting there thinking like, I'm sitting here more trying to catch up, and that's kind of the difficulty I'm having with being really totally invested in it.
Yeah, well,
because I'm sitting there and kind of going like, I don't even know how they got here. I don't know what they like. How do they change these people? Because they really, you can tell that they've definitely changed. Like they're like hardened, combat, soldiers now, and they've clearly again been in Vietnam for a while, and so I'm not saying that traditional storytelling is better or superior, but anyway, but I think the film could really have used like maybe one scene in between where you actually kind of get a sense of like how these characters changed from
it's very interesting, isn't
end.
it? I mean, do you think that this is maybe some of this is an era thing, because the film definitely doesn't have a problem taking time to show things, right? I mean, again, we've gone on and on about how much time it took for to show the wedding, but look how much time it takes to show that Russian roulette game. I mean, it's the suspense in that is just amazing. I mean,
it's really paced out. Yeah,
it's really paced out. It's very, very methodical. It really builds and builds and builds and builds, and so the film clearly has no problem taking time. And it's 3+ hours long, so it's clearly not worried about being long. So it's interesting that these quote unquote plot points are just cut out, and then you're left as an audience to just fill in the blanks to guess what happened. And I think that would lose probably a large percentage of a modern audience, because it's just, we don't see that in today's films. And I do notice, I think if you watch more films of this era or foreign films as well, I think it's more frequently that a filmmaker will do this and trust that you as an audience, hey, you don't need to see the guy go from the couch to the toilet, like how somebody got where they got. I don't know why I use toilet for that. That's funny. I'm just imagining here's a movie about a guy needs to go to the bathroom. What am I thinking?
And we watch him walk all the way. So it's a good question about is it the era? Because I love films from this era. I like a lot of foreign films and. So I think for me it's not necessarily, my issue isn't necessarily with the I don't even know if I can call it an issue.
It's just that you noticed.
I don't know. Yeah, the thing I noticed is
it's just a notice.
It's not that it's structured in this way. It's not that it's not that we don't see, but I think weirdly enough for a 3-hour movie it seems to. I feel like the suspense could be even better fulfilled if we saw more of, it's like, to me, sort of like, if Hitchcock did Psycho and Marion got to the Bates Motel and took a shower immediately, right?
Yeah.
and it's like, well, we were, it's not that it's
I like
about,
that analogy.
For me, it's not necessarily about the plot or the character development or like the story. It's more so that I feel like the scene could be even more effective, because I think what I think threw me off about it is that, again, war changes people. That's a very common theme in a lot of war movies, that war is fundamentally changing people.
Yeah.
So we jump into the scene in Vietnam, in the village, and we know that these characters have changed. And, it's not really that important to see the specific, we don't need to see some guy blowing up in front of the other guy and he's like, oh, I'm crazy now and I've got this PTSD.
I'm crazy now.
And it's, we don't necessarily need to see that. I think giving us more time with the characters as they are now would have helped that suspense, because you're kind of sitting there going like, hang on, I don't really know what Robert De Niro's been through versus what Christopher Walken's been through.
Right.
And so I feel like, and we also don't really know, is this the first time that they've seen each other in months, or have they just it's been like a week? And so I'm not saying that it's like the details of the plot that are necessarily the important part. I think that just that
but some of the character development.
Of the scene. However, I also can, like, on the kind of flip side of that, I sort of think that the scene of the Russian roulette in the POW camp is almost less important than when they get back to Saigon and they care. Like, I feel like that the scene in the POW camp is almost sort of an introduction to what happens after the fact. Well, so I can sort of understand on a like a fundamental level why, they're kind of like, no, this is just introducing this idea of Russian roulette that one of the characters will then take to the extreme later on. And of course, De Niro is also, very affected by it because he does the thing with John Cazale later. But
Well, in a way that I'm thinking about it too is, if I think about, so obviously we're talking about this Russian roulette scene. It's clearly a central, vital symbol, thematic symbol in this film, right? And and maybe as you're talking about how it's clear that this film has excluded a lot of the war experience, as it were, that most films would have kept in, right? What happened to these men as they were, landed on the battlefront, and as they've experienced their first aspects of battle, et cetera, all of that is foregone. And maybe an interesting way to think about it, I don't know, I'll posit this hypothesis to you and just tell me what you think, is that the Russian roulette scene actually stands in for all that. So the Russian roulette scene is actually a symbol for the dehumanization and violence, and kind of the senseless violence, almost by chance, that, you know what I mean? That because it's like, nobody knows if they'll live or die, and it's almost just luck. A lot of people, like, if you talk to a lot of soldiers, it's just like, it's like luck that I survived. It's not any, it's like nothing else, because it's like when people are dying to the left and right of you, it's just luck if you survive or not. And so I almost feel like maybe this motif of Russian roulette is kind of a stand-in for that war experience for these soldiers. And so instead of kind of traveling with them as they go through, different aspects of, them arriving in country, them, going through their first battles and et cetera, becoming more hardened, witnessing violence around them, the loss of a friend, or et cetera, et cetera. That's all contained within this scene.
Yeah, it represents, a greater kind of scope.
And so then that's revisited, it's like how these characters then are affected by and deal with that violence they were exposed to, that trauma. So you see how, Savage's character is affected by that. Obviously, he is physically, he's left almost like I think he's like loses both his legs and an arm, right? Or something. I mean, so he's in a hospital. He's like unable to integrate at all.
And doesn't even want to see his wife.
And his wife is so traumatized, she can't even speak, right? Knowing what has happened to her husband and having gone through this. You see Walken doesn't come back from Vietnam at all. He's is addicted to that. Like he literally...
The thrill of it,
starts doing that. Is it thrill? It's like you don't even know, It's like sometimes people relive violence they're traumatized by, not because they want more violence, but because it does something to our brains. It makes them almost feel.
It's like the only way they can feel alive and without any senselessness is.
And you see that De Niro's character is he's not affected. He's not affected. He is also affected, but in a different way. And you see that in the remoteness, his inability to integrate back into the, and he sadly, he goes and tries to save Walken's character, and sadly that Russian roulette scene is kind of plays out again. And this time Walken dies, which is like a really super intense scene, man. I mean, that's one of the most, like the acting and performances in the scene, and some of these, I mean, it's so, little digression here. I mean, it's when you have such emotionally intense scenes, God, it is so easy to do that wrong.
Yeah, no,
totally. I mean, and I know you've been there,
and as a director or as an actor too.
And I know you've seen this probably in other projects that you've worked in. Lord knows I have seen this so many times, but where it's like it's so hard to hit that perfectly.
Yeah,
it is so difficult to hit that perfectly, and they really do. And that came back to me when I watched this again, was that just that rawness, that emotional intensity is like, I feel like is rarely successfully captured on film the way this film captures that in those few scenes. To me personally, I don't know if you felt some of that, or if you could kind of what your experience of that was, but that's how I kind of experienced that.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that those are the iconic scenes of this film, right?
Yeah.
The way that they are played out, I would say, is definitely, kind of I would say that the first one, again, with the, like, I think that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the actual Russian roulette scene. I think that I think the primary things that I'm kind of iffy on are the things surrounding it. So I think that they did such a fantastic job of,
Yeah, like what stood out to you where you're like, hey, this is, I'm questionable, or you said iffy. Like what are some critiques of the film?
As I sort of said, it was just that I felt like I wasn't as invested in the scene the first time. Like the first scene when they're playing Russian roulette in the actual camp.
Oh, really?
I felt like I wasn't as invested as I could have been. I was certainly invested, but I felt like I could have been more invested had I not been sitting there going like, all right, what's the give here? What are like, and like, whereas the second one I think is much, I would argue perfect in a way because we have that stuff.
Gotcha.
Because we know what De Niro is going to do, what he wants. We know Walken's character. We saw him in the hospital earlier when he breaks down, so we understand a little bit more about him.
Yeah.
And it's, it's not about, to me, again, it's not about plot, like I said. We did The Thin Red Line a while ago now. But, that's a movie that really, if you ask someone what that movie's about, you can't really give an answer. There's not really much plot to that movie, and yet you care really deeply about these characters that you don't have a lot of time with either.
Yeah,
like because there's such a huge cast of characters in that, and so I think to relate that to kind of this, I think that first scene, I think if I just kind of, again, because it's like because as I said, every war movie discusses, which rightfully so, discusses the idea that people change. And I think if I understood just the change that these characters had gone through a little bit better, and just kind of got maybe just even like one little moment of going like, all right, De Niro has been totally screwed up by this, or Walken has been like, his experience at war has been, and again, we don't need to see, like I said, we don't need to see someone being blown up in front of them or something like that, but just something to go when they're sitting in those chairs that first time in the POW camp, to go like, dang, like this is like, I can understand so fundamentally how these people have been and are being changed by this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Which, I mean, and I'm not saying that it doesn't do that at all, by no means. I just think that there's elements to which I think they could have heightened it, and they could have raised those like personal stakes.
And I can see that for sure. I mean, look, it's not like I didn't experience that like little disconnect as well. I think because we get, film is a type of grammar, and grammar changes over time too, right? Just like any language, our language is always changing. You have some words, leave the lexicon, new words come into the lexicon, and new ways of phrasing and syntax are also kind of morphing and changing. And cinema is exactly that. It's a language, and it has a grammar, and it has a syntax, and that changes. And I think our expectation, and that's set by expectations, And I think you're absolutely right. If this film were to be made today, that I don't think a director would make that choice. I think 999 times out of 1,000, or maybe 1,000 out of 1,000, but I think it'd be very unlikely that a director would make this change to just make a spatial, like a geographic, spatial, and plot jump cut that huge.
Yes.
I don't think that would happen today. And I can definitely see your point. Because you're not caught up now. You're not with those characters in that bamboo cage in the river. You're back here. You're like, wait a minute, what happened?
And especially when you spent an hour, a little bit over an hour with those characters in the start of the film, and then suddenly you're with them after such a life-changing journey.
Yeah,
it is kind of, but again, I do also kind of understand the aspect that the function of the POW scene is very much to represent and introduce this idea too. And so I think it's not necessarily, I don't think I disagree with any of the like overarching fundamental choices of the film. I think it's more so that I think that there's like tweaks that could be made just to
of course, you don't even have to. You don't even have to qualify it. It's totally totally appropriate. It's like you're going to have different. You're going to bring who you are as a filmmaker or as an audience member, or a combination of the two, to a film, and have different thoughts and opinions. That's okay. Yeah, that doesn't invalidate the other person's choices or anything bad. It's what's interesting to kind of break things down and analyze them. I want to talk a little more about that Russian roulette scene though, because there was a little bit of controversy. So back when the film there was actually a couple pieces of controversy about this film. One of them was specific to the Russian roulette scene, in that, so a lot of people, when this film was released, said, hey, that actually didn't happen. The Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese didn't do this to POWs. This was not, there's like no recorded incidences of POWs being subjected to having to play Russian roulette. And apparently that was, if you look back in the press at the time, this was a big issue on a lot of journalists and film critics, articles about the film. And apparently the director even had to kind of speak to this on a few occasions. I'm interested in it because I think it speaks to something that you and I have discussed a few times in this podcast, especially earlier back when we were focused on Werner Herzog's films, is this idea of fact and truth. Of kind of like a literal factual accuracy and an aesthetic artistic truth. And I think this is a good example possibly of that. What do you think? I mean, especially when we're talking about this is a film that's set in an actual historical event, right? But the people are fictional, of course. The story itself is fictional. I mean, what are your thoughts? Not to put you on the spot, but I'll put you on the spot.
No, I mean, I think that's kind of why I mentioned that it's not really analyzing the Vietnam War itself, right? Because so many movies that do and like that are Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, Platoon. They all maybe a little bit less so with Platoon, but actually it certainly is in Platoon a lot. They all sort of analyze the United States' role in the war, and they kind of take a viewpoint of like the atrocities that were committed by the states in Vietnam, whereas this movie doesn't really touch any of that whatsoever.
None.
It is specifically about these guys who are captured and have these essentially which are war crimes being committed on them, right?
Right.
So I think that's. And that's not to say that that's a negative aspect of it. I'm not really looking into a movie for its politics. I'm looking into a movie for, how it makes me feel.
Right.
So I don't know if it's necessarily like even the point of the film, right? To like you said, to tell like a factual retelling of the Vietnam War, or the truth about it, or even in a situation where you're not telling a factual retelling of anything like Apocalypse Now, the MO of Apocalypse Now is an anti-war film. It's to criticize American involvement in Vietnam, and it's to criticize
or maybe war in general, period.
War in general, exactly. Whereas this, I don't really think that is the thesis of this film.
Yeah,
I think the thesis of this film is about the effect of any conflict, of any traumatic events on these working class blue collar guys from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So I while I understand the basis of the critique and the controversy, I think that I don't really quite think that that's what the movie was trying to say in the first place.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's necessarily something that's all that relevant in a way. I think that it's certainly heightening, not to relate this film to like an adventure film, but like, the Nazis weren't digging up the Ark of the Covenant, and yet, it serves a greater purpose, right?
And that's an interesting point, so that you bring up a very interesting point in contrast. I think it's worth taking a look at. So, another thing that was a controversy about this film, in addition to the accuracy of Russian roulette and did the North Vietnamese actually do this to POWs, was just the representation of the Vietnamese people as a whole, period. And I would agree with you that I think this film is not trying to make a specific factual statements about what Vietnam was, what happened in Vietnam. It's using symbology, I think, to try to tell a different story, which is this is how violence and war can change people and disrupt a community, and look at the ripples of that violence and how it can affect a small town, a group of people, and a community. But of course, it's like you mentioned Indiana Jones. I can't recall, and I haven't looked into this extensively, but my guess is that there wasn't a lot of complaints about the representation of Nazis in. Well, no, and hold on, and I don't want this to come off wrong. I am not in any way, shape, fashion, or form comparing Vietnamese to Nazis. I want to make sure that's clear. It's not my intention at all, because I know that could. As soon as I said it, I was like, "Whoa, that could sound weird." All I'm saying is that both of these films take place in a real historical event. So World War II for one, and the Vietnam War right after, post-Vietnam War for the other film. One is clearly a fiction. It's clearly fictional. It's like a much lighter adventure film, and so it has supernatural elements. And I mean, it's like, so I don't think anybody's getting confused that this is, Indiana Jones is not an actual, representation of anything real that happened. But I think it might speak to, you could think that this was a real thing, right? You could, this deer hunter is represented in such almost a documentary way in some aspects, right? It's extremely realistic, and in some ways. And so maybe that's part of what that is, where it's like, it happened, this film was released in 1978. The Vietnam War is very fresh on the minds of so many people. So many people are still reeling from the effects of that, of course, both in Vietnam and here in the United States and elsewhere. So it's very much, it's close, time-wise. And the film is talking about something so sensitive and so powerful such a profound experience for so many people that had such an impact. So I could definitely understand why people would be sensitive to these things in that film, and why they might not be for Indiana Jones, you know?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, my one, a major critique, if I do have one of the film, and again, this isn't really a critique of the filmmaking, but it's that and I mean the technical, like, craftsmanship of the filmmaking. That scene, the opening scene in Vietnam when they're in that village, it almost paints like it almost again misses this opportunity to explore, the idea of PTSD in a greater light. In not, I don't mean great in a positive light. I mean greater as in more,
significant,
deeper extent. So what we see is this northern Vietnamese soldier, or I guess they are Viet Cong because they have the Viet Cong flag hung up in the POW camp, putting a grenade in a bunker filled with Vietnamese civilians.
Right.
Whereas what I think the reason that stuck out to me, and then we have Robert De Niro trying to save them, and he lights them on fire and all that.
Yeah.
The reason I think that stuck out to me, and I think didn't really work for me, is because another thing that a lot of films explore, especially contemporary films, but even back then, again, Apocalypse Now does and Platoon does as well, is that a lot of the reason that these guys were coming back so screwed up with PTSD was because of the atrocities that were being committed by like they would be, the American soldiers that were forced to massacre civilians and things like that. And you get that whole scene in Apocalypse Now with the Ride of the Valkyries where they're they're just bombing a village. And Platoon, that's kind of the huge function of the plot, is that there's one character who kind of is like this madman who's massacring all these civilians. And so I think that it was missing this opportunity to also add a level of like significance there, where it kind of like for a second that village scene almost turns into just kind of like a strange sort of like hero versus villain action scene. And you've got De Niro on the ground and he's like rushing over with the flamethrower, and the bad guy is. So it was just kind of one of those things where I was like, definitely I was not expecting that, and it felt a little bit more two-dimensional than the rest of the film. I think that's a good way to put it, is that it just
I think it's the weakest part of the film. That from when we are immediately thrust into Vietnam until we're in the POW camp itself, that's what, maybe 5 minutes of film-ish?
Yeah.
That's it's the weakest 5 minutes of the film, I think, by far, by a long shot. I would agree with you. It's disjointed, and it seems like there's a lot of opportunity that's left on the table, like you've already discussed. I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. But I think it's interesting, as I think, just to go back a little bit to this idea of fact versus aesthetic truth versus factual truth. I mean, I think it's a question that any artist is confronted with every time you create,
Yeah.
And it's not always easy. It's not always, I think no matter what's one of the things that I've noticed as an artist, I mean, you can hold anything that you might want in your heart, right? While you're creating something, you can hold something and it's so clear and it's so crystal to you. But then once you release your work out into the world, every single person that sees it is gonna have experience potentially an entirely different experience,
Yes, yeah.
And it could be so contradictory to what you hold in your heart, and it's hard to sometimes explain to people that because their experience is their experience. They're like, well, no, I saw this film, and this is what I experienced, and and you could be over here saying, oh my gosh, I had the exact opposite thing in my heart when I made this film. So it's just definitely can be challenging, especially if you're dealing with sensitive historic stories, that are kind of set in a real history. Yeah.
And I think, I guess to one of the things that we haven't really spoken too much about yet is Vilmos Sigmund's cinematography. So it was obviously shot on film, 5247, which is one of my favorite film stocks. And it was shot on anamorphic. Very, you can tell that they're those old C-series anamorphics, because when they're the wedding scene in particular, you've got when it's like you really only had like a sliver of frame that was in focus, like the top, the bottom, and the sides. So you had this huge amount of focus fall off. But I do think, I like that look. I think it's a really interesting look. I like Sigmund. I think that the way that he again presents this town, which is primarily through post-processing of the film, like it's grainy and it's dull and it's...
Well, I think they underexposed it a couple stops and then pushed it in development, right? Am I mistaken? That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, because it's like the grain is really, really, really clear.
Yeah.
And very, very, at the forefront of the image.
And it's very dark in a lot of...
I mean, and that, I just love, again, that those moments in that town in Pennsylvania, I think are so, like, eerily beautiful. Like it kind of makes you feel of like a little bit like a industrial revolution sort of feel. There's factories that are overlooking the whole town, and so I think so I think Sigmund did as per usual.
It's so beautiful.
Great job.
And contrasted with this beautiful landscape photography where they're hunting the deer is just so. I think there's in the commentary they talked about how I think it took them about 3 weeks to shoot all of the deer hunting footage, both before and after, to get everything perfect, where they had the clouds low and thick and moving in the background.
Yeah, especially at the end when the fog is coming over that mountain behind De Niro as he kind of stalks the deer.
And they used trained deers, so this was interesting, because I always wonder, I'm like, well, how in the world do you get a deer to pretend that it was shot? Like, how in the world do you do that? So, the way they did that was that there are such thing as trained deers. So I'm assuming these deers are from the time they're born, they're raised by humans, so they're not scared of people, and they actually tranquilize them. So that's how they actually get the deer to fall as if it had been shot, was to tranquilize it, and then they shoot it, kind of falling over and passing out, I guess, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that's something that you can do in today's day and age. I don't know if
I wonder. I doubt with the tranquilizing. You'd probably have to, Because
I mean,
that's really interesting, though. I had no idea that was...
I had no idea either, because I was so curious. I'm like, there's no way in the world that you could get a deer to just fall over. Like, how is that even possible?
Yeah,
and that's they would tranquilize it.
So I guess they're reindeer then, because they're domesticated.
but
I think that's also those mountain moments, which are again very clearly shot in the Rockies or something, because that's not really what the Appalachians.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that was shot.
But looks like the Rockies at least. That it I think goes to show you that. I think a lot of times people just assume that like it's very easy to shoot beautiful landscapes because the landscape is the beautiful part and you just point a camera at it and you're good. But I've seen the way that Sigmund shoots the landscapes in this, and the way that all you have to do is watch him. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head immediately, but I've certainly seen films that are shot in very beautiful locations that don't take advantage of that or don't frame those things very well.
Here's a really easy way to illustrate this for people. So everybody listening, I'm sure this has happened to you. It's happened to me. You're standing in an absolutely gorgeous place with a beautiful landscape view, and you take out your iPhone and you try to take a picture of it. And then what does it look like? Crap.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's
exactly.
It's
and it's
actually,
not just the camera, because, you can take pretty gorgeous images on an iPhone, but
no, I just mean that you're right. I'm agreeing with you. Just because that you've got a beautiful landscape doesn't mean for a second that it's easy to capture it. It's actually, I am actually almost always severely disappointed with my ability to capture the beauty that I see with my eyes with a camera when it comes to landscapes, and have a tremendous amount of respect for cinematographers and directors who are able to actually capture that.
Which is funny, because I think we're sort of the opposite in that. I find it really shooting people very challenging.
Yeah,
we've talked about this before, where you said that. I like landscapes are like I'm a really big fan of Monet, and so I love like these like sweeping vistas, and
it even affects the lens choices that we usually like to work with. I tend to work with a little bit longer lenses. I like to get in people's faces, and you tend to use much wider lenses and kind of de-emphasize a focus on an actor's face and get kind of more of a sense of like space where you're at. It's interesting, huh? Yeah, but
Yeah.
I always disappoint myself when I try to get an amazing landscape.
It can be very tough. It's not easy. I mean, it's like, because I think that's the mistake, right? Is assuming that the landscape will look good no matter what. And then you again, like you said, you look at the image on your phone and you're like, damn, it looks like crap.
It looks like crap.
But yeah, I think Sigmund's really, he's great at even just the scene when De Niro's chasing Walken in the car after he sees him in Saigon, and he's running after the car when he's in the car with the Frenchman. It's like
not when he's running after the car when he's naked, right?
No. These like neon, like lights that line the street, and you've got that tungsten film, so everything's sort of got this blue, like all the lights sort of have this blue tinge to them, and I think that there's a reason that he's a legendary cinematographer. He did 2 of Spielberg's movies and did a lot of classics. So
he's one of the best. There's no question. I mean, we haven't talked about any of his films here, although we might. But
we did one. We did talk about Long Goodbye.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. We did Long Goodbye, but I mean, it's McCabe and Miss Miller. We've got Sugarland Express, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Blowout, which is one of my favorite films.
Blowout's great, yeah.
I mean, he's done some. His filmography is quite impressive. There's no question. One of the best cinematographers to ever hold the position. There's no doubt.
Yes, yeah.
And a pivotal figure in the American kind of new wave of cinema at that time, for sure. Wow, man. I mean, something we hadn't talked at all about music, about the score, but you and I had talked about this briefly, and it's interesting. The music that stands out to me most in this film is not any kind of score, but is in whether it's the kind of the Russian folk music that's so prominent and prevalent in The Wedding. I think is really successfully used to illustrate kind of the almost like the ancestral context of this community, which is actually really beautiful and fun to see with the dancing that they do in that. But you've got some Russian funeral music. You've got when they're at the bar, they're kind of singing along, showing camaraderie. And of course, and I want to really talk to you about this scene because I'm curious what your take was on it, because it's one of the more obvious kind of usages of music in the film is at the very end at the coda when you've got them all sitting around the table and singing God Bless America. I'm curious, what was your take on that? Do you feel like that was a genuine or an ironic moment in your mind? And there's no wrong answer, because I don't think anybody knows.
The actors seem to definitely be playing it ironic. I mean, I think you just like the look on Meryl Streep's face is without a doubt very but I don't know. I mean, I couldn't tell you the like. I mean, at best, bittersweet. Sometimes there are different takes from the writers to the actors, right?
Yeah.
So it could have very well been written as a genuine, and the reason I say that too is because it is hard to tell what the writers' real take on the American involvement in the Vietnam War is. Like, there's not really a clear, political statement being made by the film.
No, there's not.
So it can be difficult to kind of discern. I would say that, I think that the actors definitely brought more of the ironic, more of the kind of critical, approach to that. But
fair, totally fair assessment. I think my, kind of knee-jerk response to it was maybe more of like bittersweet as opposed to maybe ironic, So I don't know what that means exactly. Kind of maybe bittersweet leans a little towards the ironic. It's clearly not like a, hey, happy days, God bless America, apple pie. It's definitely bittersweet at most. But that was kind of my main takeaway. But I could certainly see, and it's interesting in the commentary, Vilmos talks about how when he was reading the script, how he was like looking at this and like, oh my gosh, he goes to Cimino and was like, are you really going to do this? This is going to be so cheesy. Like, this is going to be horrible.
And I wonder if, because of course you're from the States and I'm not, and Sigmund's not. So I wonder if that's maybe the difference is just that, like, I obviously don't have a connection to the song, or God Bless America, neither would Zygmunt. So I wonder if it's the cultural thing.
Well, he said, so Vilmos did admit, so after it was actually performed, the way it was performed, the way you see it, then he changed his mind. That, because it is more nuanced, because it does have like a certain sense of bittersweetness and irony in it that makes it more nuanced and complex as opposed to just like some patriotic, that would have felt really
very bizarre,
straight, just so bizarre at the end of this film for it to have just been some kind of
breaking out in a song.
I know that would have been really, really out of place. Any final words on the film? It's fun again as always to kind of like get to hear your take on it from another generation on a first viewing. That's always fun for me. So anything else that any last thoughts that you might have? I feel like we probably covered pretty much everything. We're at an hour.
We got a lot.
We got a lot. All right. Well, as always, audience, our lovely audience out there, thank you for hanging out there with us. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode 55. We look forward to next when we will discuss another film. We don't know which one yet, but this is going to be Cullen's choice next time, so we'll just have to wait and see. But until then, everybody, have a wonderful couple weeks. We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.